We're just 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL season. It's right around the corner. We made it, guys. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this upcoming season. And we've been putting out a series of videos the past couple weeks of all my predictions for the upcoming year and my rankings. I put out a couple videos ranking all the NFL teams' head coaches. You can check that out. I did my playoff team predictions. So we're going to be continuing my lists today with ranking every NFL team's starting quarterback going into the 2024 season. And if you're new to the channel, if you don't know how I do my lists, the criteria is very simple. Going into the year, if I want to win the Super Bowl, this is how I would rank the quarterbacks. If I'm taking the guy to be on my team, obviously the guy at number 1 would be the guy I want the most. 32 would be the guy I want the least. So let's get into the rankings right now. So kicking off the list at 32, I have the New England Patriots quarterback, Jacoby Brissett. And something I forgot to mention in the intro, keep in mind, I'm going off of these teams' starting quarterbacks based on August 21st. So that could change over the next couple days. But as of right now, these are the named starters. And yeah, Jacoby Brissett has been named the starter in New England over Drake May, which I think is a mistake because Jacoby Brissett is a fine backup. If your quarterback goes down for like 4 or 5 weeks and you need a guy to fill in, Jacoby Brissett is fine for that. But going into a season with him as your starter, you are just holding your team back. This guy has such a low ceiling. He's not a playmaker in any which way. And even if Jacoby Brissett was your starter, you would need a lot around him to succeed. He's not a guy that can run around and just make plays out of nothing. He needs weapons around him. And the Patriots have by far the worst wide receiver room in the entire league. Listen to this receiver core. Their number one option is Kendrick Bourne. They also have Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk. That's their top 3 options. Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, and Jalen Polk. Those are their top 3 receivers right now. They don't have really much playmaking in that backfield. I like Ramondre Stevenson, but that's kind of a mess. Their offensive line is the worst it's been in 20 years. And they have a defensive coach. So everything is pointing against the Patriots being not only the worst offense in the NFL, but also the worst team in the NFL going into this year. At 31, we have the Vikings quarterback of Sam Darnold. And I think even if J.J. McCarthy hadn't got injured, they made it pretty clear that he was going to be the starter going into this year. I just don't get it with Sam Darnold. Everywhere the guy's gone, he's been a failure. And I feel like every time he goes to a new team, people start talking about he's finally going to get his potential unlocked. It's finally the year Sam Darnold breaks out and proves why he was drafted so high. Guys, this is his 4th team. He's failed everywhere he's gone. I get it that the Jets were a mess. You can give him a pass on the Jets if you want because Adam Gase was a moron. The front office was so poorly ran. But Carolina, he had weapons. He had DJ Moore. He had Christian McCaffrey. The Niners, he was a backup. And the few times he got on the field as a backup did not impress whatsoever. And now that he's in Minnesota, you have all these people acting like he's going to have this breakout year. I get it. He's surrounded by a lot of good weapons. He's got, obviously, Jefferson. He's got Addison. He's got Aaron Jones at the running back. Even Hawkinson, we'll see how he is post-injury. And he's got a phenomenal head coach. But the tape doesn't lie. The problem with Sam Darnold has been not that he's a bad athlete or he doesn't have some skills. It's his decision-making. That is the ultimate fatal flaw with Sam Darnold is he just likes to play hero ball, and he will make 1 or 2 just fucking mind-boggling throws in every single game, and he just isn't good enough to overcome these absolutely reckless throws that he makes. And you have guys like Colin Cowherd, if you listen to him, has been really high on Sam Darnold. And his big excuse is, oh, well, Kyle Shanahan liked him, and Kevin O'Connell likes him. Well, yeah, well, you know who else Kyle Shanahan liked? Trey Lance. So that's not a good excuse to back Sam Darnold. If we're strictly being objective about Sam Darnold and strictly looking at his numbers and his film, it all indicates that this guy sucks. And at number 30, we have the Carolina Panthers quarterback, last year's number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young. So I don't think you could have envisioned a worse rookie season for Bryce Young other than him getting a career-ending injury. Last year was an objective disaster with him not playing good from an eye test and from a statistical standpoint. Bryce Young was not a good player last year. Number 2, his head coach Frank Reich, who's supposed to be a quarterback whisperer, an offensive guy, fired before the first season with them was even finished. So that's a mess. And on top of that, the guy picked right after him, C.J. Stroud, had probably the best rookie season in the history of the National Football League. And on top of that, you look at all the stuff Carolina gave up to bring you in, like Caleb Williams. People are saying even he is better than you. So it's a lot mentally for Bryce Young to handle. Like, I do feel bad for the guy. He's got a lot swirling around. He already has the pressure of being a number one overall pick, but he's also got all this other shit swirling around like, hey, the guy picked right after you is better than you. Hey, the guy you were traded for is better than you. And on top of that, there's just not a lot to work with in Carolina. So I do feel bad for Bryce Young. Just looking at him as a prospect, I was really high on him. I like probably 80%, no matter what anyone says, like 80% of people in the NFL community would have taken Bryce Young over C.J. Stroud had they had the number one overall pick. Just looking at it then, like obviously now it's a no-brainer, but back then, during the 2023 draft, 80% of people would have said Bryce Young. So I was high on him. The thing that I just overlooked with Bryce Young was his size. I was willing to overlook it because we've seen smaller guys recently have success, like Kyler Murray, like Russell Wilson, like Drew Brees. But all those guys had an undeniable trait to them. Like with Kyler, incredible athlete, really fast, has pinpoint accuracy. Russell Wilson, one of the greatest scrambling playmakers, get out of the pocket, make something out of nothing guys we've ever seen. And Drew Brees, arguably the most accurate quarterback in the history of the National Football League. Bryce Young possesses none of that, and he's smaller than all those guys. So the thing I overlooked with Bryce Young was the size, because he even makes Kyler Murray look big, and some of the pictures of him next to his O-lineman legitimately look photoshopped. It's looking bleak for Bryce Young. I don't know if it's going to work out in terms of him being a starter. I'm rooting for him, but it's looking rough right now. And at 29, I have the Denver Broncos rookie quarterback, Bo Nix. So if you would have said just a year ago, think of right now, just go back one whole year. If you would have said Bo Nix is better than Bryce Young, people would have thought you were fucking insane. Because Bryce Young was the number one overall pick, and Bo Nix, when he was at Oregon before last year, wasn't even viewed as a first-round talent. Even like leading in, like a couple weeks before the draft, people still had Bo Nix as a second-round player. For me, I don't really get like the slander around Bo Nix, especially as a rookie. Like, this guy had the most starts in college football ever as a quarterback. You know, in the history of college football, no one played more than this guy. So I think he's clearly NFL ready, if you could ever be NFL ready. He's got a capable offensive play caller with Sean Payton, who's been around the block. He knows what he's talking about. They got some weapons there, unlike Bryce Young last year, where he really had like a really old Adam Thielen and nothing else. Like, they at least have Cortland Sutton. They have Mims. They brought over Bo Nix's college receiver, Troy Franklin, so he's got some comfortability there. So there's something there with Denver. I don't think they're going to be a very good team, but Bo Nix individually, I view him as like a very high floor type guy. I think he's capable. I don't think he's good enough to like carry a team, but I think he can be a productive player for sure. And clearly Sean Payton really likes him. Just a complete 180 of last year, where he fucking hated Russell's guts, was saying to the media he didn't like him, where he's clearly embracing Bo Nix. So I think, honestly, Denver is one of the most fascinating teams, just given all the craziness that's gone over the past couple of years, given that people viewed Bo Nix as a big reach. I'm really intrigued to see what they do. Coming in at 28, we have the Raiders quarterback, Gardner Minshew. The Raiders have to be legitimately the most frustrating team in the National Football League, because they have talent on this team. They've got players. Davante Adams, I will still argue, is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, arguably still the best technical route runner in the entire league. You got that guy, literally a Hall of Fame talent, just sitting there. You got Max Crosby, who's a premier pass rusher. You just stole Christian Wilkins from the Dolphins, a sack monster. You just drafted Brock Bowers, a generational tight end prospect. You got players, but they continue to fuck up with the two most important positions on this team. Head coach Antonio Pierce, I like the guy, but you're going to be at a disadvantage in every single divisional game you play. I mean, he's not even anywhere remotely near some of these other coaches of Sean Payton, Andy Reid, and Jim Harbaugh, and that's just in division. You're going to be at a coaching disadvantage in every divisional matchup. And then looking at quarterback, Gardner Minshew is a really high-end backup. He doesn't provide really much at all as a long-term starter. And you can point to last year with the Colts all you want, but he had Shane Steichen then. And Shane Steichen I've dubbed as the next Sean McVay. The guy's an offensive genius. He don't got Shane Steichen in Vegas. He got Antonio Pierce. So I don't think he's going to be anywhere near as productive. The scheme is not going to be anywhere near as potent as it was with the Colts. So Can we just please get Devontae out of Vegas? Like, he just deserves better than this. And if this was going to be ultimately just, looking at it in hindsight, why the fuck didn't they just keep Derek Carr? When you look at their quarterback play over the past 2 years, like, I get it, Derek Carr has been disappointing, but look at these quarterbacks they're trotting out here. Last year they had Jimmy Garoppolo. That was a disaster. Aiden O'Connell, okay. Good backup. Gardner Minshew, another backup. Why didn't they just keep Derek Carr? Let me know in the comments, Raiders fans. And coming in at 27, we have the Giants quarterback, Daniel Jones. So I remember last year, I was having a conversation on this channel, and I wasn't really sure the definitive answer. And the conversation was, what quarterback in the NFL is on the worst contract right now? And it was down to 3 guys, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, and Daniel Jones. And I think I can now definitively say that it's Daniel Jones. I think he's by far the worst of those 3 guys. And at least with Deshaun and Russell, you can understand why they got those contracts at the time. Russell Wilson was still viewed in his prime when he went to Denver. They traded a lot for him. It made sense to give him that contract at the time. Deshaun Watson, a little more sketchy because of the off-the-field stuff, but just coming off of some great seasons, looked like he was entering the prime part of his career. With Daniel Jones, this never made sense, and I made reactions to it back when it first happened. The day I saw it, I could not believe it. The fact that Daniel Jones is making $40 million has to be the greatest theft in the history of the United States. The fact that this guy is making $40 million annually. And this is why I give Brian Daboll a lot of credit, because no matter how things go with Brian Daboll, if they suck this year and he gets fired, he can always say, that guy Daniel Jones that sucked, I got him a $40 million contract because I made him look good my first year there. Like Daniel Jones, no accuracy, no deep ball. The only redeeming quality and the reason why Daniel Jones isn't lower on the list is because he is a good athlete. He can run the ball. That's kind of it, though. In terms of throwing the ball, terrible. And when you look at the season that earned him that $40 million contract, he threw 15 touchdowns. 15 touchdowns got him a $40 million annual contract. So I don't know what to do with the Giants. I think they're going to be really bad. I think a big part of them being really bad is Daniel Jones. They had, from PFF, the worst offensive line last year, and they lost Saquon. I think they're going to be terrible. And I don't know the specifics of Daniel Jones' contract, but hopefully for their sake, they'll be able to move off him after this year. Coming in at 26, I have the Browns quarterback, Deshaun Watson. So we just talked about who's on the worst contract in the NFL. Deshaun ain't much better than Daniel Jones. I think Deshaun Watson is not very good. Obviously, I have him this low. And the reasons why is we haven't seen him be an elite player in almost half a decade now. When you look back at Deshaun, his last really good year was 2020. The Texans sucked, but he was individually great. That was almost half a decade ago. Every game he's played in a Cleveland Browns uniform, outside of one half where he was okay against the Ravens and then got hurt, has been an utter embarrassment. He's been pathetic as the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. And I think it's just completely naive to either A, think he's good, or B, think he will be good again, because all the evidence points to he will not be a good player. He will not be an elite player again. Let's just take a quick look at his track record in Cleveland. 2022, coming off the suspension, those whatever it was, the final 5 or 6 games at the end of that year, he was fucking pathetic. He was like dreadfully terrible. It wasn't like he was like disappointing or mediocre. No, he was terrible in those games in 2022. Then you go to last year, 2023, he played half the year. He was terrible last year. He was not good. He was a below-average quarterback outside of that one half against the Ravens. Then he got hurt. So all the evidence tells us Deshaun Watson is not a good player and will never be a good player again. Now, whether that's he just simply regressed as a player, or he got his money and he don't give a shit no more. I don't know what that is. You can debate that all you want, but I just simply think he's nowhere near the player he was in Houston. When you just watch him from a play style standpoint, he doesn't play like he did in Houston. The thing that made him like a generational level talent, the thing that got him that monster contract, was his ability to just make plays out of nothing, get out of the pocket, scramble, pull a play out of his ass, similar to like what Russell did in Seattle, creating plays out of the pocket, scrambling, and just being a game-defying playmaker. And he just doesn't do that anymore. He's not as accurate. His deep ball's gone. He's not as good as an athlete as he was. So I just think it's naive to think he's ever going to be that good again. We're talking about 4 years ago. So that's kind of my rant on Deshaun. 25, we have the Titans quarterback, Will Levis. And this is the career-defining season for Will Levis because we're going to find out if he can actually play. They've put an apparatus around Will Levis for him to succeed. He has weapons on this team. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins. He's got a nice running back tandem between Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears. They invested in their O-line very high. I think they picked, like 6th or 7th overall, taking J.C. Latham. He's going to be a freak. And they have an offensive coach now with Brian Callahan, who just ran Cincinnati's offense pretty elite. They went to a Super Bowl not that long ago. So they've put a lot around Will Levis to succeed. So if he fails in Tennessee, it's not on the Titans. It's on him because they've put the players around him, and it's all up to him. This is why I think Tennessee is honestly one of my most interesting teams. People think they're going to suck, but if Will Levis pops here, if Will Levis actually works out, the Titans are going to be a viable wild card team. They have a really nice roster. I think their coach is going to work with Brian Callahan. It's all on Will Levis. So I'm putting him here at 25 because I think he's a big unknown right now. He had that one awesome game. What was that? I think that was his first start last year. He threw 4 touchdowns, and then he didn't really do much in the rest of his games. But everyone points back to that 4-touchdown game. Can he do that? Can he replicate that on a a game-to-game basis? And if he does that, he will be a freak athlete and a superstar in the NFL. He's a really good athlete. He's got a monster arm. He is a cannon of an arm. I'm excited to see this guy, whether he fails or succeeds. He's one of my most intriguing players going into this next year. And coming in at number 24, we have the Saints quarterback, Derek Carr. So he was honestly one of the most disappointing players for me last year. I felt like I was a lot higher on Derek Carr last year than most people in the NFL community. And he drastically disappointed me. I picked the Saints to win that division because they signed him. And just looking around that division last year, this was obviously before Baker resurrected his career. I was like, he's the best quarterback. You can argue this is the best roster. They seem like the most stable team to me. They should win this division. But I feel like they lost this division because Derek Carr, because of his boneheaded decisions, making just terrible plays, and particularly like the clutch. That's where Derek Carr plays his absolute worst. Whenever the pressure's on him to make the big throws to carry the Saints to wins, that's where Derek Carr just completely shit his pants last year. And I remember we made a video after that game against the Falcons. I think he threw like 3 picks and just had a total meltdown in that game. And that just was the total realization that, wow, I really overrated this guy. He had a couple good years in Vegas, but he's nowhere near that. I don't know what happened because it's not like he had some massive significant injury. But you look at Derek Carr just a couple years ago, was a guy people had threatening to get into like their top 10. Maybe not quite in the top 10, but he was in that like 11 to 15 range. Now I have him all the way down here at 24. I think he's kind of shot. Like I said, he's terrible in the clutch. And I know it's like, this is more of a basketball term, but I think it does apply to Derek Carr. He is a stat patter. That's usually more of the thing you associate with NBA. But Derek Carr is 100% a stat patter. Whenever they're down like 31-7 in the fourth quarter and they just keep passing at the end of the game, yeah, no shit, your numbers are going to look better, but you have no chance of winning the game. So I feel like if you guys have watched Saints games, you know that. Derek Carr does pad his stats, and his stats look a lot better than what he actually is, and he always melts down in the biggest moments. And at 23, we have the Seahawks quarterback, Geno Smith. It's kind of hard to believe we're going into year 3 of Geno Smith as the starter in Seattle because I think a lot of people viewed him as just like a one-year bridge QB after the Russell trade. Now we're going into his 3rd year as the starter. Obviously, his first year as the starter there in 2022, he was awesome. He led them to the playoffs. This guy has a really high floor. He's not going to like have a meltdown or anything or try to play hero ball. But I think you are capped. He has a very low ceiling. I think your absolute max potential with Geno Smith as your quarterback is a 9-win team and a first-round playoff exit because I've seen it. His first the 2 years he's been the starter there, that has been their cap. The first year, they were a 9-win team and got to the playoffs and then got trounced by the 49ers. Then last year, I think they won 8 games. They missed playoffs, and Pete Carroll was fired. So I think that is kind of the best you can do with Geno Smith because he's a very limited guy. He's not a great athlete. He's not a great mobile player, and that's kind of like the modern-day X factor for quarterbacks is you have to be able to get out of the pocket, scramble, and play make like Russell did with Seattle for so many years. And Geno just doesn't really do that. really at an elite level, doesn't have an elite arm. But it's clear if you put pieces around him, if you put weapons around him, the guy can win you some games. So he's a productive player for sure. You just have a very low ceiling with Geno Smith as your quarterback, and I don't really think you have any shot of winning a playoff game with him as your quarterback. At 22, we have my starting quarterback, the Steelers quarterback, Russell Wilson. Oh boy, some of you guys might call me biased, say he sucks, he should be a lot lower down here, especially after that, oh my God, that preseason game was really, really bad. It was hard to watch, and people are starting to freak out now about that preseason game. Guys, Steelers fans know this. Last year, we were the best team in the preseason last year. We were 3-0. We scored on every drive that Kenny Pickett played. We scored a touchdown. So going by those metrics, we should have been really good last year. No, we weren't. Kenny Pickett's not even on the team now. So if we suck this year's preseason, then by those standards, we should be sweet this regular season. So guys, don't take anything away from preseason games. That's the moral of the story. I thought the offense was figured out. I thought maybe Matt Canada kind of figured out the offense last year just based off the preseason. Turns out, that was dreadfully wrong. Matt Canada fired, Kenny Pickett gone, all the quarterbacks gone. So Russell struggling in the preseason. It's not great. It's not ideal, but I'm not sounding any red alarms. I have to see him Week 1 in Atlanta against the Falcons, and then I'll make my decision on Russ. I still think there's something there with Russell Wilson, and you can say he's washed all you want, but last year he threw 26 touchdowns in not the most ideal offensive system. He had a head coach that simply hated his guts, and if you just listen to that Tua interview a couple days ago, Tua talked about when his head coach, Brian Flores, hated him. It was almost impossible to be in the right mental state and play your best as a player. That's what Russ just dealt with all last year with Sean Payton. So, yeah, he wasn't going to have a great year because his head coach fucking hated him and was always telling him he sucked. So you had that going on. And I just think we have better personnel on our offense than last year's Denver Broncos. I think our offensive line is going to be vastly improved. We've invested some heavy draft capital in the line the past 2 drafts. George Pickens poised to be a breakout superstar at the wide receiver position. And I love our tandem of running backs between Harris and Warren, who I think complement each other perfectly. And don't forget Pat Freiermuth. Don't forget we have a new offensive coordinator with Arthur Smith. So for me, there's a lot to like. I think there's a lot working in Russell's favor here in Pittsburgh. I just think he's in a better environment. And like I said, in a quote-unquote washed year last year, still threw 26 touchdowns. There was a point the midway through last year where the Broncos were the hottest team in the NFL. People forget that. They went on a 6-win streak. They beat teams like the Chiefs, teams like the Bills, and they were looking really good because he was playing good, clean football. I expect that. I think he's going to be pretty good, but I can't put him much higher because I have to see it first. So you guys sound off in the comments on Russ. And coming in at 21, we have this year's second overall pick, Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. I'm all in on this kid. I think he's going to be a superstar. I just can't put him much higher because obviously we haven't seen him play a real NFL game. But I'm all in on Jayden Daniels. I think he's going to be a freak in this league. I mean, when we talked about it a couple times with some of these other quarterbacks, with the X factor of the modern-day NFL at the quarterback position. It used to be you have to be able to stand up in the pocket and deliver strikes here and there. You look at Brady, Manning, Drew Brees. That was all their MO back in the day. That's not the case in 2024. The thing that makes quarterbacks elite now is being able to play make, get out of the pocket, create plays out of the pocket, and I think Jayden Daniels can do that at an elite level. He's an elite athlete. He's fast as fuck. He has a great deep ball arm, and he's got some weapons around him in Washington. This isn't like a dumpster fire he's going to like Drake May is in New England. So I'm really high on Jayden Daniels. Again, another one of those guys I am super excited to see play this year. And at number 20, we have the Colts quarterback, Anthony Richardson. He was the 4th pick just last year, and he's actually an identical player to Jayden Daniels. Now, he's obviously bigger, stronger guy than Jayden Daniels, but when you look at their top 2 attributes, they're the same thing. Number 1, that playmaking, scrambling ability to get out of the pocket and just pull a play out of their ass, make something out of nothing. And number 2, bazooka arms. Anthony Richardson has a fucking howitzer of an arm, and he showcased that in Florida in college. And the only reason I put him over Jayden Daniels because I really do view them as equals. But Anthony Richardson, we have real NFL footage of him. Even though it's a very small sample size, we actually have seen Anthony Richardson in NFL games. And that like 3.5 sample size from last year, Anthony Richardson was a really, really good quarterback for the Colts. And so similar to what I said about Jaden, sky's the limit for that guy in terms of potential. Another guy I cannot wait. I'm going to have to make a video because I feel like I've said this for a ton of these guys. I'll have to make a list of like the top 10 players, most intriguing players going into this year, because he would definitely be on that list. Coming in at 19, we have the Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. I feel like it's definitely one of the most hated guys in the league, especially after getting that big contract. People think he's not good. He has a very low ceiling. Say all that you will. Guy's extremely productive, has pinpoint accuracy, and you have to give the Dolphins a ton of credit for leaning into Tua's strengths. That's what you should do with your quarterback, is play around their strengths, and that's what they've done. They've built this offensive apparatus, probably the best offensive apparatus in the National Football League, with all these weapons everywhere. Tyreek, Waddle, all these guys. The running backs are incredible. The play calling is insane. It's all built to suit Tua's play style. So yeah, he might be limited as an athlete. He might not be that tall or strong, but they've put an incredible system around him, and they've maximized Tua as a really good player. And I don't think you can quite, I don't know if I buy into these narratives of like he sucks in big games or all that, because he's only played one playoff game in his football career in the pros, last year with the Chiefs. Obviously, he was terrible in that game. I'm not going to deny that, but it was like negative 200 degrees there. It was in Arrowhead. It was against a dominant defense, but he was still, even with all that factored in, he was still very bad in that game. But that's only one. That was his first playoff game. He's won some big games as well. Like he beat Buffalo last year, early on in the year. So yeah, I don't buy into the narrative. I think we just don't have a big enough sample size yet to start like saying Tua's a fraud and all that. I still think he's a very, very good, productive player. And at 18, I have the Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield. So if you just go back like a year ago, it looked like Baker's career as a starter was done. He was bouncing around from team to team. The Browns, the Panthers, the Rams, and then with Tampa. And keep in mind, he called them. They didn't reach out. He reached out to them. And here's the thing with Baker. I feel like he definitely always had the God-given talent. He was always an incredibly talented player. He was always a really good athlete. That's why he went number 1 overall, was because of that talent. His problem was always the maturity stuff, beefing with reporters, calling out medical staff people in the press, and not being a good leader at all. I think he was finally humbled by bouncing around through all these teams, and he just finally grew up this year. I think that's finally, that was the missing key for Baker Mayfield all these years, was he finally just matured this year. And like I said, I think he just took a look in the mirror. It was like, I'm playing a large part in this. I am kind of the reason why I'm bouncing around. Maybe it's not other people screwing me up. It's me screwing me up. And he grew up as a leader and really honed in on that. And I think it's one of the best stories. I always love a redemption story. That's what he had this past year. He threw for like over 30 touchdowns. Played that final game of the regular season with cracked fucking ribs because he was like, there's no way I'm not playing. I'm getting this team to the playoffs. He did it and won a playoff game against the Eagles. And that's another impressive thing about Baker Mayfield, is the 2 times he's made the playoffs in his career, he's won a playoff game, which you look around at some of these other guys in this range, they don't have that. So you got to give that credit to Baker. He got a long-term extension in Tampa, well-deserved. We have now reached the last player I'm ranking in part 1. At 17, I have the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, Dak Prescott. I know this is definitely going to be the most controversial placement on here. I have been labeled the Cowboys hater. I've been labeled the Dak hater last year. I don't think that. I don't hate Dak. I see myself as the Dak and Cowboys truth teller, and that's why the Cowboys fans hate me, is because I deliver the raw truth to them. And like I said at the beginning of the video, my criteria is for winning the Super Bowl. It's not to beat up on the Jets last year or the Giants or the fucking Commanders. It's to hoist the Lombardi. So that's why Dak ranks so low, is because, yeah, if you want to be a dominant regular season team and beat up on like the Carolina Panthers, sweet, you found your guy. Dak Prescott would be like top 10 easily in that category if we're just looking at regular season. But when you factor in his postseason performances, he's legitimately one of the worst postseason quarterbacks I've ever seen. I've been watching the NFL for almost a decade now, and I don't think I've seen a bigger choker in the playoffs in the NFL than Dak Prescott. This guy is a fucking embarrassment. anytime January comes around. It's not like he, like with other guys like Lamar. Let's take Lamar, for example, another guy who's labeled as like a playoff choker. With Lamar, I think the problem with Lamar is he just doesn't play up to the standard we're accustomed to in the regular season, which is bad. But that's not what Dak does. It's not like Dak plays down. Dak is like simply the reason why they're losing these games. It's not like he's failing to step up and lead. He is solely the reason they're losing these big games. It's because his ridiculous turnovers, just inaccuracy. And when we look back at that Packers playoff game last year where he completely shit his pants on national TV against a bad Packers defense and a 7 seed. He threw, 3 picks? I think he had 2 pick sixes. He had 0 passing yards in the first quarter of that game because anytime the spotlights come on, the big moments come on, Dak Prescott is an abject failure, and that's why they only had 1 win last year over a team above a 500 record. So you can go ahead and cry in the comments all you want about Dak Prescott, but like I said, we're ranking these guys based on I want to win the Lombardi, and he's simply not in that upper echelon, nowhere near it. So that's why Dak is at 17. So that's been it for my for part 1 of ranking every NFL team's starting quarterback. So stay tuned. Either tomorrow or the day after that, we'll be putting out part 2 where we rank 16 through 1. And eventually I'm going to rank every NFL team. And then we're like I said, we're getting right in here to the season in a couple weeks. So really excited. Yeah, let me know down in the comments what you thought about all this. I'm sure this wasn't controversial at all. Please like and subscribe.